Hello there, Boxset bingers. That's really hard to say really quickly. We're reviewing Watchmen, not The Watchmen, but Watchmen on HBO here in the UK, watched on Sky Atlantic, starring Regina King and Don Johnson. Now, my understanding of Watchmen, we've seen the trailers for this TV series. I have a memory of watching the film many years ago, I think 2009, around there, with Izzy, my eldest, in New York, and she was very excited about it. It was sort of one of those, I believe it was sort of one of those first graphic novels that stepped to the side of the slightly mainstream, geeky, I mean, albeit that it's all geeky, but, conventionally geeky superhero DC comics. I think it sits within the umbrella of the DC comic universe. I think it doesn't disavow the fact that DC superheroes exist. Even the original film, I believe, was about a sort of band of was it sort of vigilantes or superhero types who'd been driven underground or something along those lines. But anyway, the TV series, they go to great lengths to explain that the TV series is something slightly different insofar as it's very much set in a contemporary, alternate USA. And we have very contemporary characters, it's a contemporary setting, it's all very recognisable. So this TV series is trying to sort of almost update the original Watchmen and park it within an environment, I guess, and a world that's very relatable and identifiably ours, but not ours. We still have this sense of superheroes happening in the background, or there being these figures in the background. We have still got bands of people who've been driven underground. But what I quite liked about this episode, and it's kind of established right at the beginning, is that there's a very fine line between those masked people who are vigilantes, or in this episode, the 7th Cavalry, essentially a sort of Ku Klux Klan. And if you think about it, the Ku Klux Klan were and are a masked outfit, aren't they? So masking and wearing masks is a big thing. And if you think about superheroes in general in superhero films, I mean, I'm sure PhDs and entire degrees are run based upon explorations of what the mask means and the hiding of self. But in this, you've got that sense of the law enforcers are masked. They have these sort of yellow half-face masks. And of course, you've got the neo-fascists, essentially, who are also masked, and masked for more nefarious reasons. So masking, everywhere there's masking. And the danger, I always think, whenever I think of a superhero film or series that's about real people who are superheroes kind of driven underground. So what they're trying to do, in a sense, is park the notion of superhero-ness or superheroism within a real setting or a real world, however unreal that world is, if you like. The fear is that it always ends up looking like slightly down at heel characters in really sort of sloppy outfits running around the streets, not really being proper superheroes. I always remember seeing a documentary a few years back where real people dressed as superheroes, and their superhero pants were a bit baggy at the butt, and their knees were a bit baggy, from where they'd stretched their fabrics. And anyway, I get obsessed with that kind of stuff. But anyway, I don't know why I'm always made to think of things like Kick-Ass, and there was a series or a film recently called The Boys, wasn't there, which I think tried to subvert the whole idea of the superhero. Anyway, so I'm not coming at this from the position of knowing the canon, not knowing the Watchmen oeuvre, so I'm not going to be approaching it literally, and I'm not going to be approaching it from a sort of Watchmen aficionado's perspective. I'm a big fan of Regina King. She obviously was in If Beale Street Could Talk. And if I'm honest, I'm quite a sort of nostalgic fan of Don Johnson, who plays a sort of sheriff-like character in this with his, his Stetson and what have you. Now, the first scene in this episode was incredibly arresting. I thought, again, it sort of reminded me of the first episode of that series, The Preacher. This was a scene in which it was 1921, we're in Tulsa, which apparently this is a real historical thing, that Tulsa was seen as a sort of affluent black neighborhood, and some white supremacists or Ku Klux Klanners essentially attacked and assaulted the entire town. Now, in this manifestation, they had bloody aeroplanes flying in and dropping bombs and things like that. But it started really magically, I thought, with the silent cinema. We had the silent film, we had the mother of a boy who's sitting in the audience on his own in the cinema watching, and the mum was playing the piano. And I thought that was quite symbolic as, a child, a young black child looking at this film. And it just reminds you of that whole act of looking at a film and our aspirations, and how, once upon a time we were looking up at these heroes on the screen. And I suppose superheroes are the heroes of the silver screen of today, aren't they? And then suddenly there's all this sort of shooting and all this stuff going on. Distorted soundtrack was very good, and everyone's running through town. Some really, really quite vivid violence. It's not for the faint-hearted, you know, innocent women thrown out of shops and shot and stuff like that. And essentially this boy is sort of manhandled out of the cinema into a car, the truck that he's in hiding and gets shot at, and he's sort of being rushed out. And these amazing shots and amazingly executed scenes of airplanes blowing stuff up, and just Tulsa absolutely destroyed. So the boy escapes in the truck, and then suddenly we cut to the boy waking up at night and the truck's crashed and they're all dead, the people who've rescued him. And there's just a sign on him saying, watch over this baby, watch over this boy, and he finds a baby. A little bit, I thought, sort of riffing a little bit on the whole Superman, finding Superman. You know, that Moses thing of finding a baby. Where was that twisted recently? It was in Brightburn, wasn't it? Where a child is found out in the garden. And so then we had this really nice graphic device. One thing I have always liked about Watchmen is the way in which both the film and the series carry over the sort of font and the idea of the ticking clock and the idea of the sort of acid house smiley face type thing, which I think is great. We're then given a huge graphic with the Watchmen style writing. It's summer and we're running out of ice. Sort of, I guess that might be the way they introduce the chapter titles. And then we cut to the present day, and we see a truck driver who's sort of a bit suspicious. He's drinking something. He's got something obviously a bit untoward, a bit alcoholic in his thing, and he's stopped by the police. And what I liked about this episode, and what I do like about superhero shows in general, is when they go for the smaller dramas or the micro details. I mean, again, that's why we were such fans of the Joker film. You know, where you home in on even when there's a drama developing, rather than having great big, you know, universes falling apart and rocks tumbling and great flying orbs of light like I don't know what the Odessa thing is and all that kind of malarkey. This was a cop who pulls over a chap that he's suspicious of, who's carrying a truck full of lettuces. The cop has got a yellow mask on because that's what they have in this. He suspects the driver of potentially being up to something no good. Then he goes back to the car and he seeks clearance to have his gun released from a sort of clasp within the car. So it's a bit Judge Dreddy, this. You know, so you have to call in the fact that you're worried, and then they will give you various sort of tick points that you have to pass, and then you can actually pull the gun. The gun jams, and before you know it, we have another scene of such extraordinary violence. Now, what I liked about this was I felt like, okay, I've bought into the idea of a sort of superhero twisted type thing. We've seen no superhero-ness yet, but we're being reminded of the fact that the only thing at the moment that's kind of different is the mask over the cop's face, who's a black cop, and the fact that his gun is quite sort of modernistic looking, and then he gets shot. And so suddenly we're sort of in a Mississippi burning situation where a black cop has been shot. There's clearly some beef. There was another sort of mask in the glove compartment. I thought, well, this was quite intriguing. I liked all this. We then cut to Don Johnson. Now, Don Johnson, of Miami Vice, and recently we saw him in Knives Out. He's called out of seeing a musical Oklahoma. It's clearly all parked very much in the sort of Oklahoma South. I don't know whether we're in North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi. It feels like we're in that sort of location, especially with Don Johnson, you know, his Florida connection, the accents and all that kind of stuff. And then you meet all of these kind of strange people who are like Don Johnson's acolytes and sort of policemen, and, you know, men in shiny helmets that not even helmets, they're kind of, it's just that weird, it's not even shiny helmets, it's just weird linen that they pull over their faces that masks their faces. Really cool. I mean, you know, reflective and all stuff like that. So basically it's called in the fact that this cop has been shot, although the cop isn't actually dead, bizarrely. I mean, he's been shot so severely. But the one thing that this nasty sort of Nazi did was he threw in a lettuce, which was in the back of the van. And there's quite a funny little exchange between Don Johnson and one of his acolytes. They're saying, yeah, they threw in a romaine lettuce. Is that a message? And Don Johnson, I'm sure, I couldn't quite hear it. I think he says, were there croutons with it? I don't know if the suggestion being, was he trying to make a salad? And then we have this curious little pan across to Dr. Manhattan on Mars, and we see a house crumbling. Can anyone clarify what the hell that was all about? What was going on there? It's kind of intriguing. I like the way it was shot. Then we meet Regina King. Regina King, great character. You know, she's a mum, she's doing a career day at school. Brilliant shot of the eggs going into a bowl, shot from underneath, and it's the smiley face, the emblematic smiley face of the Watchmen logo, which I really like. And then we have this really odd moment. We have a moment where they're driving home, Regina and her child, and suddenly all these slops start to land, when you get a torrential downpour and you hear about it, of pestilence, like frogs, but they're like sloppy squid. Again, I presume, is this something that happens and features within the graphic novels? Everyone sort of considers it to just be quite normal. It's like a heavy downpour, so people pull out umbrellas, they swipe them off the top of the thing, they hose down the front of the houses. Part 2, Regina has a bakery. It says a front, it's not really. And this was a bit, again, there was a bit of I thought they were riffing on Batman here, where she had to she headed to the back of her bakery shop that's not opened. Obviously it's a front for her kind of strange superhero get-up. She goes underground and she has to go in and she gets all her gear and she sort of heads down into the underground and she goes to where Don Johnson is, and then there's Don Johnson with all these underground sort of police. Presumably they're all operating. Are they operating in they're sort of like a bunker or in a shelter, and they're watching a film by the 7th Cavalry, the people who we figure the guy who shot cop at the beginning is a member of. And that's all pretty good. But then, got this chap with a panda's head on. So here's the other thing. It's a bit like taking acid, this show. It's a bit like, and I think that's clearly in there if you think of the acid house smiley face. I think, that must have been part of the original genesis. Again, I'm coming from a perspective of a novice. I don't necessarily know this. But, is that right? Was Alan Moore the originator of this? Was he riffing on ideas of sort of hallucinogenic drugs and all that kind of stuff? Because it's pretty random. A chap in a panda head. It's not his head, it's a helmet, but it's like his mask. So there's obviously there's something very important about the types of masks that different people have. Regina says, look, I've gone and kidnapped this guy who she has. She's headed off into this sort of trailer park and she's pulled some guy. I'm not entirely certain why she went for that guy, but she went into and she pulled this guy out and she's got him in the boot of the car. Someone she suspects has got sort of info that could be useful to them. And she tells Don Johnson she's got him, and they say, should we put him in the pod? And it's like, you don't want to go in the pod. Anyway, they go in the pod, and I thought there was one of the greatest lines in there where this guy with the shiny face is one of Don Johnson's guys, is clearly the interrogator, and he says to the white supremacist guy, he says, how would you feel if I shat on the US flag? Now, here's where I thought the show started to creak a bit. That should have gone a bit further. I thought that could have gone a bit more stranger, a bit more how Killing Eve was in the first series, where he went a bit sort of random, and I thought that the pressure that could have been put on that guy in that pod could have been worse. And at this point, it then became a bit predictable. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and I was thinking, okay, I like this. I think I'm enjoying this. I think I'm kind of getting to grips with this weird, strange, contorted kind of police force / undercover cop Regina King thing. She's unusual. She's like a cookie baking mum, but she's also a sort of secret fucking superhero. That's brilliant. I'm up for that. And then it suddenly went into the whole back end of this, went into a really strange, once they'd got this guy out of the pod, once they'd confirmed the white supremacists, we then had this huge cattle ranch shoot-off fight in part 3. Huge shootout with cows being killed and huge machine guns, and Regina in her ninja-like bat sort of caped, great outfit, her cape and that, with her sort of face covered. She's sort of all kitted up, and this enormous kind of almost battle, civil war battle breaks out, sort of in this copse of trees. And I kind of lost a bit of interest there. I don't know what anyone else thought. I just thought it lost its sophistication. I thought it was doing something quite sophisticated. Now, parked within this end part is Jeremy Irons. Can someone clarify who the fuck was Jeremy Irons? Who is he? What is he? Why is he there? Now, Jeremy Irons was odd. Jeremy Irons, it was like they shot his scene, which was like a prolonged scene of him eating and then him being massaged naked at his table. A bit creepy and a bit eerie and a bit... Ugh. He's a great actor. I do love Jeremy Irons. When he's good, he can be as hammy as fuck sometimes. But I thought he was good in this. But who is he and why is he? And I'm presuming that will become clearer over the next few episodes. But he was sort of operating in a totally parallel universe. I thought maybe he was Mr. Dr. Manhattan, or is he obviously something overhanging from the Alan Moore? But I felt at this point my lack of knowing the original Alan Moore graphic novel was really kind of kicking in here, and I got a bit tired by this point. Now, that's not to say I want to give up on it, because by the very end shot, and I don't want to give away the end shot, but suffice it to say, the big battle happens, an unlikely death occurs at the end of this first episode, and I thought that was quite arresting, though I thought it was a bit predictable. Now, some of the things that I did like, what did I like about it? I did like the way in which it's clearly suffused and infused with commentary on the continuing racism and the sense of, you know, a push towards white supremacy in America. I like the way it was still dealing with that. I like the way it inverted, unfortunately, and it took some great risks and gambles with notions of lynching and things like that. Again, it was playing with the idea of who's masked, who's a villain, who's not a villain. I think that disorientation is purposeful, and in some regards that's kind of quite neat, because I don't think it ever is a case of someone's a goodie and someone's a baddie, although a white supremacist pretty much usually is a baddie. But I do like the idea that they're sort of blurring moral boundaries between all groups, so that, you know, Regina King, is she a goodie, isn't she a goodie? Was Don Johnson, he wasn't particularly likeable, but he was kind of okay. Is it a series we should stick with? Is it something that's going to keep getting better? The reviewers, the critics, have been really positive about this, but the audience hasn't. So I think Rotten Tomatoes, it's up in the 90s, around there, but Metacritic, which is viewers, it's down at about 45-52%. So I don't know if this is going to be a success for HBO. Is this working? Is this a clever subversion of the superhero concept? I don't know. What do you think? It entertained me for the first 25 to 30 minutes, and then in the last 10 to 15 minutes it lost me, and then it hooked me back in right at the end, as you would expect it to. But I felt it got locked into and sort of let down a bit by a lot of unnecessary shooting and fighting and all that kind of stuff. Now, I know you need that in a superhero thing, but in a superhero inversion, I prefer the quieter stuff. I preferred the earlier scenes. I preferred all that quiet, latent, layered sort of racism. Who's on whose side? Who's looking out for who? Who's a vigilante? Who's not a vigilante? Whose moral codes are we trusting here? Who's right? Who's wrong? That sort of stuff, really rich. At times reminded me visually of The Purge. I guess it's all the masks and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I think it's worth another watch. It's worth episode 2. Let me know your thoughts.